He was there, standing in the corner of the chapel, alive though dead. It couldn't be real, and yet no one else seemed to see him. Before starting the report, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Write in the comments what time this video arrived for you. Now, enjoy your favorite horror session. I never thought I'd feel such a shock in the face of death. I grew up in a household where ghost stories were told with reverence and fear, not to scare, but to teach us not to ignore what we don't understand. My grandfather used to say that the world of the living and the dead sometimes overlaps, but only for those who have something left unresolved. My mother, always calm, would add, "If something appears to you, listen. Their silence might be a cry for help." So when I heard about the death of Henry, my childhood best friend, that chill down my spine wasn't a surprise. He and I had been inseparable since kindergarten, but life took us in different directions. We lost touch, and the rare news that came was always wrapped in fond memories and old stories. At the funeral, surrounded by people mourning his loss, I approached the casket, trying to accept the irreversible absence. That's when I saw him. Henry, standing in the corner of the chapel, eyes fixed on me, as if he were trying to understand why I was there, why he was there, just standing, while everyone cried and he, inexplicably, looked alive. I tried to speak to him, to walk toward him, but he vanished the instant someone crossed the space between us, like mist dissolving in the wind. The room seemed to close in again, and the murmur of voices returned, swallowing that impossible moment. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling. Henry was still with me. Not like before, but like a shadow that refused to leave. On empty streets, I felt a weight behind me, a presence not of fear, but of silent urgency. Lights flickered without reason, and my name was whispered in places where I was completely alone. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. Guilt over not keeping in touch, over not saying what needed to be said while he was still alive. But each night, each whisper told me otherwise. He didn't want to scare me. He seemed lost, like a prisoner of something he couldn't understand. And then a question began to haunt me. What had been left unresolved between us? What did he need me to see so he could finally be free? The silence answered with no answers at all, and I found myself trapped between the past and the present, trying to decipher what that last look, that impossible moment, had tried to show me. The weight of that night clung to me. Every step I took through the quiet streets of Asheville, North Carolina, seemed to draw an invisible line between me and Henry, between what was left unsaid and what could never be undone. His presence wasn't a threat, but a gnawing unease, like he was caught in a limbo between the world of the living and the eternal silence of death. My life before all of this had always been shaped by quiet beliefs, learned slowly at the kitchen table with my grandmother, and through stories told by my father in that calm, hushed voice that gave life to every supernatural detail. They always said spirits don't return out of whim, but because they still carry something important. Guilt, regret, a final plea. I never thought it could happen to me, until I saw Henry at the funeral, until I felt the weight of his eyes, so alive, so full of confusion and despair. The nights that followed were torment and calling. I tried to understand what he needed, what I had missed in the past, or perhaps what he hadn't been able to say while still alive. The streets I walked whispered old secrets. Lights blinked and shadows twisted around me. But only I could see, only I could feel. The whispers of my name echoed through the silence of my empty house, pulling me toward places I had avoided for years. Places where our friendship had deep roots and untold stories. It was on a particularly cold night that Henry appeared before me and didn't vanish. His eyes were a well of sorrow and doubt, as if he were trying to understand his own existence, standing there in the dim light of my bedroom. "Why won't you leave?" I asked, my voice shaking, heavy with grief and guilt. He hesitated, as if the words were stuck in the invisible throat that now held him captive. And then I remembered the promises we'd made as kids, the words left unsaid, the fights we never apologized for, the dreams we never shared. "You're gone, Henry, and that's okay. You can rest now," I said, my voice steady, trying to offer peace to what had been adrift. He looked at me for a long time, eyes filling with tears that couldn't fall, as if he finally understood there was nothing left for him here. A sad smile touched the face I knew so well, and in that moment, he disappeared. Not in fear, not in anger, but with the peace I had longed for both of us. The silence that returned was heavy, but different. Now, it was the silence of true absence, of final farewell. I walked home that night alone, but finally at peace, and I understood what my grandmother and father had always meant. Sometimes it's not the dead who haunt us, but the unfinished ties between people. And true release only comes when we face what's been left behind, in the past, in our hearts, or in silence. Henry needed me to accept his death so he could move on, and I had to realize that it wasn't guilt holding him there. It was the unresolved bond between us that needed to be let go. Now with a heavy but calm heart, I know he's at peace, and I can finally move forward too. Are you enjoying the video? Leave your comment. Your support is very important to the channel. Now let's move on to the next report. I never believed in ghosts. Until I saw him sitting in that armchair, I never believed in ghosts. Until the day I saw him sitting in that armchair. Since I was a child, my mother taught me that fear only grows if you feed it, that dark stories were just tales meant to keep kids in line. My grandfather, a man with calloused hands and a silence people respected, didn't speak much, but he always said, "There are things man's not meant to understand, and that's for the best." I never paid much attention to it. I believed the world could be explained through science and facts, not spirits. When I started working as a nurse at the old hospital in town, I felt like I was stepping into a world full of untold stories. The building had a heavy atmosphere, with long corridors and walls yellowed by time. I was assigned to the palliative care wing, the place where people came for their final days, or maybe weeks. Among them was Mr. John, a man with a peaceful smile and eyes that carried the weight of a silent past. He was kind, lonely, and every afternoon when I arrived, he would be waiting to talk. We'd chat about life, his beliefs, and mostly about his one sadness, the estrangement from his son, a break he had never been able to mend. The first few weeks went by without anything unusual, just the inevitable heaviness of death approaching. But then, on the third or fourth night after he passed, I noticed something strange in room 213. Walking past the hallway, I saw his reflection in the mirror, sitting in the same armchair he used to favor. The odd thing was, when I looked directly into the room, it was empty. I questioned my mind, my sanity, but that image kept returning, night after night. No one else seemed to notice. It was as if he was still there, trapped, waiting for something that never came. That was the greater mystery. Why hadn't he left? What was keeping him tied to that reflection, to that chair? It was only in the silence of that old hospital, in the echo of my solitary footsteps, that I realized some questions can only be answered when we decide to face the ghosts of the past. That night I stood in the hallway, staring into the mirror at Mr. John's reflection. His image was calm, but there was a sadness so deep it seemed to draw the air into the room, like a silent vacuum. My mind raced, trying to make logical sense of it, but all I felt was a strange kind of cold. Not from the temperature, but something else entirely. In the following days, I paid closer attention. Every time I passed room 213, his reflection was there, in the same chair, still, waiting. I asked the other nurses, doctors, even the cleaning staff if they had seen anything. No one had. Not even the janitor, who knew the hospital like the back of his hand, gave it a second thought. To them, room 213 was just another empty room, but to me, room 213 was far from empty. It was on a particularly quiet early morning that I decided to act. I sat in front of the mirror, stared at the reflection, and tried to speak to him, as if I could reach through that invisible barrier. "John, are you here? Why?" My voice trembled, barely a whisper. And then, in that moment, as if time had stretched thin, I began to understand. He couldn't leave because he was clinging to one desperate hope, his son's visit, a reunion that never came. During the weeks I cared for him, I had heard incomplete stories, words said with regret, but never the full truth about his son or why they had fallen apart. I decided to search. I needed to know more, to understand what was keeping that spirit trapped between the mirror and the world. I managed to find John's son, a man with tired eyes and a heavy expression, living just a few towns away. I called him, gently explained the situation, and to my surprise, he agreed to come to the hospital. When the son entered room 213 for the first time, something shifted in the air. He cried beside the empty bed, holding a hand that, just seconds earlier, had only been a reflection. There, between old walls and trapped memories, two broken souls found a path toward reconnection. That night, I returned to the hallway to look at the mirror in room 213, expecting to see John's reflection again. But all I saw was emptiness. That gentle man had finally moved on. Because the truth he needed to hear, the forgiveness, the reconciliation, had come. The weight that bound him vanished like smoke in the wind, and with it, the silent presence in that armchair. Since then, I've never seen anything in that mirror again. But I learned something. Some ghosts aren't here to scare us. They're here to remind us that wounds don't heal until the truth is faced, even when it hurts. And if you ask me whether I believe in ghosts, I'll say no. But I do believe in the power of what we leave behind. In the words we never said, the love left unresolved, and the souls that need the courage of the living to find peace. Before we move on to the next story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It's a pleasure to have you here. Now enjoy the moment listening to the next story. I never imagined that a place I chose to call home could hide a silence so heavy it felt like it was crushing my soul. Since I was a child, I grew up listening to stories told by my grandfather, a quiet man who used to say he believed that some houses hold living memories, ones that don't fade with time, even after the people who live there are gone. My mother, on the other hand, always reinforced an old belief passed down through generations, that certain places carry fragments of interrupted lives, and that we must respect whatever remains there, even if reason can't explain it. When I moved into that old building in downtown Richmond, Virginia, none of those stories seemed like more than superstition, just tales to soothe childhood fears. The building was one of those frozen-in-time types, with narrow hallways and creaking wooden floors, like something out of an old movie. The rent was cheap, which, for someone starting life on their own, was enough to overlook a little discomfort. The first few weeks were normal. I worked, came home late, read a bit, and went to sleep. But soon something strange began to unsettle both my body and mind. Something that couldn't be explained by the age of the building alone. Every night, always at the same time, 9:17 p.m., a small figure would appear in the window of the apartment next to mine. A child, or so it seemed. A little boy who waved with a fragile, almost shy hand, his unblinking eyes fixed on me. At first, I assumed it was just a lonely kid living next door, maybe trying to make a friend. But something about that presence chilled me to the bone, as if that figure didn't belong to this world. I tried looking around, hoping to meet the neighbor, maybe bring over a pie, something to break the invisible wall. But when I finally went up to the next apartment, the door was locked and silent. There were no signs of life. I asked the building's janitor, an older man who avoided eye contact, and he told me something I'll never forget. That apartment had been empty for years. The last resident, a woman who lived there with her young son, had died in a fire that damaged part of the building. She had tried to save the boy, but the child was never found. No one ever moved in again. So why was the child still there? And why did he wave at me every night as if asking for help? That's when everything started to change. The lonely presence grew stronger. Whispers began to echo at night, faint voices pleading, "Find me." It felt like a desperate call, something vibrating through the walls of my own apartment. Fear mixed with curiosity, I could no longer ignore it. As I dove deeper into the mystery, my mind returned to those stories from childhood, the ones my grandmother used to tell about spirits trapped in places, waiting for someone to give them peace. It was with that belief that I started searching, exploring every corner of the building, every crack, every space where daylight never reached. Hidden between old walls, beneath loose floorboards, I found something no one expected to still exist there. A small set of bones wrapped in a blanket, hidden long ago. A discovery that answered many questions, but raised even more disturbing ones. What did that child really want? Why was the past of this building reaching out to me? And most of all, could I really give him the peace he was seeking? Finding those tiny bones wrapped in the blanket felt like opening a door that should have stayed closed forever. Each bone, each fragment, carried a weight I felt in my chest, a deep sadness that seemed to fill the air. I knew deep down that the child was the son of the woman who died trying to save him. But why had no one ever found him? And how did he end up there, hidden within the very walls of the building, so close and yet invisible to everyone? For days I couldn't sleep. The whispers returned, more persistent now, accompanied by a chill that sank into my bones, as if the building itself was trying to tell me something. I knew I had to act. I couldn't leave that child there, forgotten with no place to rest. With the little I knew, I contacted a small local funeral home, explained the situation about the remains, and managed to arrange a proper burial, something that I hoped might finally bring peace. On the day of the funeral, I went alone. I carried the small box carefully to the cemetery, feeling a strange mix of relief and fear. As I laid the remains in the earth, I felt something shift, like something being released. A weight lifting from my chest, from those old walls, from the silence that had haunted me since moving in. I returned to the building that same night, heart heavy yet hopeful. And then something happened. At exactly 9:17 p.m., the window next door was empty. For the first time in months, there was no small figure, no timid wave, no unblinking eyes staring back at me. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was a silence of ending, of farewell. But there was more. The whispers stopped, the cold vanished, and for the first time, the building felt light, as if it had taken a breath after decades of holding in a pain no one dared to face. I spent days and nights reflecting on what it all meant, thinking back to the stories my family told me when I was young. Maybe my grandfather was right. Some houses really do carry memories, fragments of lives that never reach their end. And sometimes those memories need someone to acknowledge them before they can finally rest. The child I saw wasn't just a random ghost. He was a cry caught in time, a plea for help that no one else heard until I came. My purpose wasn't just to solve a mystery, it was to restore dignity lost, to close a wound the past refused to let heal. And when I buried those bones, I realized that no matter how much we try to ignore it, the past always finds a way to meet us. And with that, the silent presence disappeared forever. Today, when I walk past that building, I still feel a chill, a memory of that dark summer. But I know finally that the child found rest, and that I, unknowingly, was the bridge between two worlds, between fear and peace. The silence returned to the building, but now it is light, filled with something I can only describe as relief. And in the end, that was the only answer I needed to understand what had followed me since that first night at the window. Not every mystery is about fear. Sometimes it's just a plea for help, waiting to be heard. Let's move on to the next report. But first, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. The smell of strong coffee in the middle of the cemetery froze my blood. I was standing there, beneath the shade of the tree Grandma loved so much, surrounded by flowers and tear-streaked faces, when suddenly that familiar aroma hit me. It was coffee, but not just any coffee. It was her coffee, the one she brewed every morning, bitter, hot with that gentle touch of cinnamon only she knew how to use. And with it came the unmistakable scent of fresh cornbread straight from the oven. Sweet, warm, and comforting, like a hug on a cold day. For a moment, everything seemed to blur. The relatives sobbing, the heavy silence of the place, and that sensory memory pulling me into past I thought had been buried with her. The woman who raised me like a son, who wiped away my tears, who taught me the flavors of life. Somehow she was there with me. Before that, my life moved to a dull rhythm. I worked in a windowless office in Dayton, Ohio. My routine was gray and uninspired, and Grandma's words felt like distant echoes from a world I had left behind. She believed in old ways, in rituals and stories I labeled as superstition. She used to talk about souls that never truly leave, about promises that bind us and, if left unfulfilled, keep our loved ones tethered to this world. I remember her telling me once, on a chilly afternoon while brewing coffee in her modest kitchen, "Son, we only leave when we've closed everything we left open. If something's still unfinished, the spirit stays here, waiting for us to set it right." On the day we buried her, I couldn't quite grasp what she meant, but now standing there, wrapped in those familiar scents in the middle of a cemetery, a deep sense that something was terribly wrong started to grow inside me. In the days that followed, my home, once a silent, empty space, began to shift. At exactly 6 a.m., the old kettle would whistle by itself. Grandma's sacred coffee hour. Doors I was sure I had locked would creak open. And that old song she used to hum while baking, it played on the radio, even when the radio was off. Each strange occurrence seemed to shout that she was still here somehow. And that thought unnerved me, like living in a house with a heartbeat next to mine. A heart I couldn't see. The truth was, I had never fulfilled the last promise I made her. I swore I would publish her recipe book, the worn notebook she kept with love, stained with flour and drops of coffee. I always said I'd get around to it, but life kept pushing it further away, into the realm of someday, which really means never. But why did that matter? Why the scent, the sounds, the little things that seemed to happen only to me? I felt the answer was hidden in all of that only by closing this chapter could I finally move on. But what was she trying to show me? And why did that kitchen, once so alive, so full of warmth, now feel haunted, like a liminal space where the past and present were colliding in some strange invitation? More than anything, why did it feel like, even after the burial, she was still waiting for me to do something? Something I didn't fully understand. The uncertainty gnawed at me, and I knew the only way to find peace was to uncover that final story she had left behind, hidden between aromas, melodies, and unspoken promises. That night, restless and unable to sleep, every creak in the house felt louder, like she was whispering to me from every dark corner. I knew I had to face it. I needed to get her recipe book from the kitchen cupboard, that old stained object I'd never really given the attention it deserved. As I touched the notebook, I felt a strange vibration, almost as if something inside it was alive. I turned the pages gently, my fingers passing over pencil notes, sketches of dishes, coffee marks, and smudges of butter. It was more than just a cookbook. It was her memory, her way of nurturing, her soul materialized in each handwritten line. While I read, that same song began to play on the radio, the one she used to sing while cooking, the soundtrack of our mornings. Then I saw it. On the final page, written in her trembling hand, was a dedication, or rather, a request. "For you who never forgot my love, publish these recipes and I'll be able to go." The message was clear, but until that moment, too powerful for me to face. Grandma was still here, in the house, in the scent, in the song, because I hadn't honored that promise. I had been selfish, believing life had no time for the little things, which in truth make all the difference. At that moment, the air in the kitchen thickened and the scent of coffee and cornbread returned, stronger than ever. But this time, not frightening. It was warm, inviting, like she was wrapping me in one last hug. I began transcribing the recipes one by one, doing my best to preserve every word, every secret she left behind. And as I wrote, I could feel a quiet presence beside me, a gentle gaze, maybe even relief that I was finally understanding what really mattered. Still, the house continued showing subtle signs. The kettle, the creaking doors, the persistent music. It felt like she was still guiding me, or perhaps testing me, to make sure I finished what I had started. Then one early morning, exhausted and emotional, I wrote the last recipe and, with a pen, added a small dedication to the notebook's cover. "For my grandma, who taught me the flavor of life, I promise your love will live on in every page." I placed the book on the kitchen table, and in that instant, the house fell silent. For the first time since the funeral, I woke up without the smell of coffee in the air, without the music playing, without the kettle whistling on its own. The invisible weight I had carried, the presence that kept me suspended between past and present, was gone. Grandma had finally left because I kept the promise that wasn't just hers, it was ours. That kitchen, once haunted, had become a sanctuary of memories I could now honor and carry with me. And I understood then. Sometimes the dead remain because love and promises still breathe among the living. Honoring them is an act of courage and care, a way to let go without forgetting. And in the silence she left behind, I discovered that her real legacy wasn't the recipes. It was the living memory that love, even after death, can be felt in a scent, a song, and above all, in a promise fulfilled. Some stories never have clear answers, and that's perhaps what scares us the most. To hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and get ready for the next story.